everybody, and welcome back. This is the Movie Pit Podcast, and I am your host, Christian Renteria, and this is the June movie Roundup. It's going to be a little bit shorter because I already done 3 movies in June that I talked about already. A different episode, of course, that was The Watchers, Bad Boys for Life, and I also talked about Under Paris, the movie on Netflix. Today, on this episode, we're going to mainly be talking about 3 movies. We're going to talk about as you can it's probably, if I put it in the title, we're going to talk about the Bikeriders, Inside Out 2, and Quiet Place Part 1. I am briefly going to talk about another movie. There are some movies in June that I did miss. Obviously, Hitman. You can tell I have not talked about that one yet. I haven't watched it yet. It is on my watch list. I will talk about it when I do finally watch it, but it's not going to be right now, unfortunately, because I did not, again, watch it. But let's move on. There's a bunch of other movies, obviously, of course, that came out in June. Kinds of Kindness came out in my area here in June. I haven't gotten a chance to watch it yet, but I will watch that and talk about that on a later date as well, hopefully. But we're going to be focusing on 4 movies, really more 3 movies. This first one I'm going to talk about is really just kind of I just kind of mentioned it because it did come out in June and I did technically watch it. It's Trigger Warning. It's a movie on Netflix. I didn't really have too many high expectations on this one. It stars Jessica Alba, and it's by the stunt choreography, if I remember correctly, it is by the team by 87 North, who do a lot of the action choreography for the John Wick movies. They did it for the David Harbour Santa Claus movie Silent Night, I think that's what it's called. I forgot the title for the movie already. So there was some stuff that I was like kind of looking forward to this, and then we had to watch Trigger Warning, and it is very much trying to be like this early 90s kind of late 80s action movie. It's very much about, someone who goes back to, Jessica Alba plays this character who goes back to her small town when her father passes away. And she finds out that, the small town is, there's some people in the town who are a little bit corrupt, and she's got to, go and do her thing. That's the basic premise of what this movie is. And this movie just goes about it the wrong way. I think it comes down to the script. So the script is terrible. And maybe I don't want to blame it on Jessica Alba. It's easy to be like, oh, Jessica Alba's a terrible actress. Like, no, I think she can be a good actress when the material is right. I just don't think this material was right for her, because this movie is just not good. I think it does come down to the script. It feels like it's trying to be like those early 90s movies, and it's not saying that it can't work. It just, this doesn't work in particular. And there are parts of this movie where you kind of just know it's like, okay, it's going to be that kind of, like the beginning of the movie. I don't know if they shot that last and they just ran out of money, but it looks like they shot it. Like there's a certain shot where it literally looks like they probably shot that in a parking lot. Like it looks so out of place and so just like, yeah, it wasn't good. And there's a part where it's raining, where it didn't really need to be raining. Like you can tell it's fake rain. Like you can tell it's fake rain. You're just like, why? Why would you put that? So I would not recommend Trigger Warning, even if you're like an action fan. The action's just fine. It's not even okay. It's just fine. Yeah, I would not recommend Trigger Warning. So the next movie we're going to talk about is The Bikeriders. And this is another one I have a little bit more to say, but I don't have too much more to say than the Trigger Warning. And it's not because, unlike Trigger Warning, Bikeriders is not a good movie. Bikeriders is a good movie. It is a fine movie. I just felt that first half of the movie was better than the second half. I felt that the second half, for me, loses a little bit of steam, even though the basic premise of the movie, which is, of course, Tom Hardy's Johnny, his club, the Vandals, is slipping away from him, and it's something that he doesn't recognize anymore. And then everything that happens with Austin Butler's Benny, it makes sense. The progression of the story and, the loss of something that you had every good intention for, but things get away, and sometimes things get out of control, and you don't know how to control it, and it becomes something that you don't recognize anymore. And everything that happens with Johnny and Benny and even Jodie Comer's character, that progression felt real. And it's a progression that I think if you go watch the movie, or when you go watch the movie, it's something, it's like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. But for me, for some reason, I just couldn't connect to it in the end. The cast is great. It's very much a who's who. Like I mentioned, you got Hardy, you got Butler, You got Jodie Comer in there, director Jeff Nichols, regular Michael Shannon. Michael Shannon has been in every movie that Jeff Nichols has done. So he's in there. Boyd Holbrook, Norman Reedus, Damon Harrion, just and a bunch of other people. And of course, it's led by, like I mentioned, Comer. She's really the star of the movie. I know the movie is like, oh, it's Austin Butler, it's Tom Hardy. It's like, no, this is Jodie Comer's movie for a good chunk of it. And obviously one of the big things that everyone was talking about with Jodie Comer was the accent. Everyone was like, that is such an over the top, accent. I can't believe that's the accent she chose. And obviously Comer, very good with their accents. But when they released a video, or someone released a video, it was Jodie Comer's accent, and then it was the real person's accent that she's playing. And she sounds so much like her. She just absolutely nails it. And this movie, by the way, it is based off a photo book called The Bikeriders. And the guy, I forgot to put down the guy's name. I think it's the guy from Challengers, which I still have not watched. I know, stop. But he's playing the interviewer and the photographer, the real person who did all this, who joined that club. I don't know if he joined the club, but he was following the club around and taking photos. So this movie is based just off photos. The narrative of this movie is not something that actually happened. It's something that could have possibly happened. But a lot of this is based off like interviews with people and just photos itself. So everything that kind of happens, like the whole Tom Hardy and Tom Hardy's Johnny and Austin Butler's Benny, like conversations they have, maybe those didn't really happen, but but it makes sense for the story that they're telling in this movie for it to happen. So just want to put that out there. And Comer, by the way, and I mentioned that because Comer is our narrator. They do this thing where she's being interviewed and she's taking the interviewer and us, the audience, through the years of the club. And there's a little bit of bounce back in between. So if you're kind of one of those, if you're watching it at home and you're on your phone and you're not paying attention, you'll be like, wait a minute, what just happened? Because why are they going back and forth? So it's a little confusing on that end, but it only happens like maybe once or twice. And then for the most part, it's very kind of linear in its storytelling. But this movie is very good, and it really falls on to the cast. And it's Butler, it's Hardy, it's Comer. They're the ones that keep this movie afloat. Again, even though I wasn't really a big fan of that second half of the movie, where I think it loses a bit of steam, they keep me interested. And a lot of it is Comer, a lot of it is Hardy, and some of it is Austin Butler as well. So, again, it's an okay movie for me personally, with great performances that will keep you interested. And if you can, get through that second half where I felt like it does lose a little bit of steam, I think you'll pretty much enjoy The Bikeriders for what it is. The next movie we're going to talk about is Inside Out 2. Pixar, what did we do to you? Why do you make it your life mission to push us to the verge of tears and make us question our life in every good way possible? I mean, damn. I mean, seriously. Inside Out 2, once again, like the first one, and like a lot of other Pixar movies, makes you have all the feelings. Here we get an older Riley. She's hitting puberty, which was teased in the first movie at the very end, which of course means new emotions. So, besides joy, sadness, disgust, fear, and anger, we now have anxiety, embarrassment, envy, and ennui, or boredom, as she would say it is. And Riley is going away to a hockey camp. We get a lot more Riley in this movie, which I found very interesting. It's not just the emotions anymore. Like half of the movie is the emotions, and the other half is Riley. Whereas the first one, it really felt like, 3/4 of the movie were the emotions and 1/4 of the movie was Riley. This is very much split down the middle, and we get a lot more Riley in this one, which I thought was kind of a smart move, because obviously, she's going through puberty, and she's going through all these new emotions in her, and it's really kind of Riley away from everything else, kind of away from her parents. She doesn't have her parents right there like she did in the first movie. Riley's going away to like a hockey camp before high school starts, and she wants to start, making her new journey. She wants to take this new journey because, there's a reason why, but I won't spoil it here. It's very, very real reason, I think. I think we all kind of, have that shared experience. But anxiety, voiced by Maya Hawke here, perfectly by Maya Hawke, takes it upon herself to take over and change Riley to have a quote unquote better life in high school. And I think there's even a line that says, "You're just not what Riley needs anymore. She needs something new." And that's, anxiety kind of becomes, the new kind of emotion that's going to take over Riley's life. And of course, it's up to our previous emotions to save the day and make sure that anxiety doesn't ruin Riley's life, or at least in their, eyes, doesn't ruin Riley's life. And I did like Inside Out 2. I still don't know if I liked it more than the first movie. I'll admit, though, I laughed a lot more with this one than I did with the first one. First one was pretty funny. This one, though, I felt myself laughing more than I did. I think the humor here is a little bit more for the older crowd as opposed to the younger crowd. The sarcasm is definitely one that only the older crowd will get. The fun, kind of callbacks and homages to kids shows is for both, but I think the older viewers get it a little bit more, maybe. And the fact that they're actually making fun of it as opposed to like it being like there to be like, oh, this is like some, this is like if your little kid's like, oh, this is like the show I watch. It's like, no, us older adults, like we know they're making fun of it, kind of. I just think overall I find myself laughing more with this one than I did with the first one. Story wise, we do get, like I mentioned, a lot more Riley, which is nice because we see the eternal battle of her emotions and how it's truly affecting her life on the outside in the real world. And unlike the first movie, I think this is where I don't want to say it's my hot take, but I think this is where I kind of pivot away from some of people that have been talking about this movie. Inside Out was one of those rare movies where you didn't really have a villain. Like there wasn't like a pinpoint villain who was out to get Riley or out to get the emotions. You make the argument that Joy is that because she's pushing down and not really caring for Sadness's emotions herself. Here with this one, I don't see Anxiety as like the true blue like villain, like an alt-right villain. Like obviously she thinks she's there to help Riley. And obviously the good thing about a villain in any kind of movie is they don't think they're the villain. They think they're the hero in their own story. And if a villain is written well, and well enough, they're either on one side of the spectrum, which is like pure evil, and you're like, yeah, there's no redeeming this guy, or the other part is like, this is a villain, but what they see is, how they see it is good and right and justified, and their performance and, how they're portraying those actions, us, the viewer, be like, maybe they're kind of right. But with Anxiety, it's like, it's different because like she doesn't know any better, kind of, right? Like her whole thing is that she's anxious and she's, using, everything in her mind and everything in her power to make sure that Riley is having a good life. And that means kind of putting her in a bubble almost and coming up with all these scenarios that can give her the best life that she can possibly get and not cause her to, be quote unquote a failure. And some of the things that she does, Anxiety, in this movie can be viewed as antagonistic and maybe kind of the villain. I'm not calling her outright the villain because I don't want to do that. But Anxiety does feel, if you really want to like be like, oh, we need a bad guy in this movie, it's probably Anxiety. But again, I'm not going to be like, oh no, she's the villain. Of course, this movie has to have a bad guy. Like, no, Anxiety is not a villain, but she does have very antagonistic tendencies to everything. So this is kind of where I divot away, because I heard a lot of people be like, this movie doesn't have a villain. Anxiety is not a villain. And again, I don't see her as a villain, but I do see her as antagonistic. There's a difference. I know there's a difference. Don't look at me that way. Anyway, I love also, since we're talking about Anxiety, that Inside Out 2 doesn't steer away from that. And especially to someone so young, Anxiety, anyway, the feeling in general, emotion of anxiety. And it doesn't steer away from what Anxiety as a whole, not the character, just Anxiety in general, can do to someone, especially someone so young. But I know that those feelings and actions that Riley is going through and that the emotions themselves are going through, us humans, real humans, not the ones in the animated movie, real humans feel every day. And seeing it in an animated form in a kid's movie, but also not really, because, everyone watches, Pixar movies, we can relate to it. That was very poorly constructed sentence, but we can relate to it. In terms, I'm getting anxiety right now. But we can relate to what Riley goes through, and we can relate to what the characters are going through, because we all go through anxiety. It's one of those, it's, if you don't go through it, if you don't think if you watch this movie and you literally tell people or yourself, I didn't see anything that I can relate to in Inside Out or even this movie, you're lying to yourself. I think you're lying to yourself. Because even though, not all of us are, adolescent preteen girls going through puberty, it doesn't mean that us, me specifically being a guy talking, can be like, I don't know what she's going through, because I know exactly what she's going through. We've all felt those emotions. We all have had those emotions. And it goes to that argument a little bit, to kind of get off track. Not necessarily too off track, but to the argument that animation is just for kids. I always love that quote from, it was Guillermo del Toro, who said that animation is not just a kid's movie, it's a medium. That's it. It's a medium. It's not just a kid. Animation is not just for kids. It can be for everybody. And it's true. Most of the time when we see an animated movie, it's a kid's movie. And it's made for kids. And that's about it. Right? But what I love about these Pixar movies is that, they're geared toward kids, but we can still get a lot from it. And I think we can get a lot more from the Inside Out movies, because it's about emotions that everybody feels. And I mainly want to talk about one thing in particular, which is something that I don't think we would see in any other. I think we have seen it. Actually, no, going back, we have seen it. We've seen the character have a panic attack. And we see Riley having a panic attack in this movie. And that scene in particular is very, very good. The other movie I'm talking about is Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, where pretty much the whole thing about the Puss in Boots, to talk about that movie for a little bit, which I love, by the way. If you've not watched it, you should watch it. Is that Puss is going through, he's basically, he has panic attacks in the movie because he's basically run out of his lives, pretty much. And he's the character that doesn't fear anything, and then he runs into something that he's afraid of for the first time in his life, and it gives him panic attacks. And I thought it was so good. It was so good in that movie. It's so good in this movie too. And I wanted to bring up the panic attack because of my next point, which is the fact that Inside Out 2 again does different animation styles. They did the kind of modern art style thing in the first movie, and here they do it again, and it's kind of that continuing trend of different animation styles. And what they do here is very, very cool and funny with the animation styles. But I want to talk about that panic attack scene, because it looks like the shading in that scene is so much darker. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it just was, I don't know if it was just my screen or, the movie screen or whatever, but I felt like the shading in that scene was so much darker, because you can just feel everything. The camera was so close to her. And then I remember that quote that was going around that we took Unsung Gems as an inspiration for Inside Out 2. And I'm like, how are you going to do that? And I think that's kind of how they did it. And I think people were taking it a different direction. But I think that particular scene was how they were doing it, where it was just her having a panic attack and the camera was so close to her, and she was rubbing her chest, and she was touching the wood on the bench because she's in a penalty box in that scene. She's just trying to ground herself. And I was like, that's so real. You don't see that in other animation movies, because that's not something that you really want to go into. But Pixar is no, we're doing that. We're going there. We're teaching, kids who are watching this that, hey, this is things that you're going to go through, and here's how you deal with it. And here's how you can deal with it. Maybe there is little emotions in your head that control everything. Who knows? But on the outside world, this is how you get through that. That kind of felt like word vomit. I apologize. But I don't know what I can add more to the conversation that has been beautifully said by other people about Inside Out 2. And Inside Out 2 doing very well at the box office. Good for them. And I'm sure that, more future watches, we can really dig into, more about Inside Out 2 and see different stuff like that. So I would highly recommend. I don't think I actually said. I would highly recommend you all go watch Inside Out 2. Very, very good. All right, let's talk about the last movie that I have here for you guys, and that is A Quiet Place, Day One. So a prequel to the previous two A Quiet Place movies, and not only a prequel, it takes us back to the very first day, because obviously, part two was a direct sequel to the first one. This one takes us back even before day one, or even the first Quiet Place movie, and it's the aliens that crash land on Earth, and they did it in the worst place to be, one of the loudest cities in America, a point that the movie makes out, that like the sound that comes out of New York City is like a constant scream over and over again. Thought that was a very interesting way to open up the movie. So John Krasinski is more of a producer and story creator for this, because Pig director Michael Sarnowski, I think that's how you pronounce his name. I apologize if that's not how you pronounce it. Takes over as writer and director, and he nails it. He does. Lupita Nyong'o and Joseph Quinn are also our leads. They also nail it. Lupita being the true lead in the movie. She plays Sam, who I'm conflicted to reveal why she's in New York City, because they kept that storyline, her storyline, hidden in the trailers, which kudos to them for doing that, because they could have easily put that in trailers and TV spots and everything, but they didn't. But she's in the city when the aliens attack with their cat named Frodo, and she's dodging people and aliens before eventually meeting up with Quinn's Eric, and the two travel together to survive. And why Lupita's in the city, and when she meets up with Eric and kind of her mission and everything, it's very consistent. She never lets go from that, and I thought that was a very, very cool thing that they did. And I'm very conflicted to even talk about it. I'm not going to talk about it. I won't say it because I won't reveal it, because I think it plays very much into the emotional beat of the movie, especially in the end. So I'm not going to talk about it. But that said, I'm glad that the initial reactions that I saw online from people after watching this movie and seeing, everything about Lupita's storyline, that they didn't seem to mind it, that they actually liked it. So that's good on you guys. And, again, I'm not going to give that away. And because of that, because of, Lupita's character, Sam's intentions and motivations and everything in the movie and her storyline, I think it works even more, especially when she meets up with Quinn's Eric, because they have great chemistry together, especially as the movie goes on. And I could have watched them, especially near the end, just go keep doing stuff in silence. I really could. They have such great chemistry in this movie. And it never gets romantic. That's something I will spoil. It never gets romantic, because that's always the fear, right? When you kind of see these movies, like, oh, these two characters who, don't get along at the beginning, and, they kind of, find out little things about themselves, and it's like, oh, they always fall in love. No, they do care for each other. They very much do care for each other, but not in a romantic way, which I think is very, very good. And there's a scene that solidifies that kind of near the end, and it's no pun intended. Any other movie, I could have used this little, cliche line, and it would have been okay. But I really do mean no pun intended. It's a very quiet scene that these two are in together, kind of near the end, that kind of solidifies that these two truly, care for each other, and not in the romantic way. They just care about each other. It's like they want to see everything through to the end. And it's a very quiet scene. It's a very good scene. It just happens to be in a survival horror monster movie, which I thought was very funny. Get a little bit more into them. Lupita Nyong'o, great as always. She strives in the horror genre. She really does. Little Monsters, which is kind of one that kind of falls on the wayside. If you haven't seen Little Monsters with her, highly recommend it. It's very funny. It's very good. It's a horror comedy. It's, but it's still very, very good. She's very good in it. Us, obviously, and now this. Quinn, no stranger to horror either. Stranger Things, obviously that's the thing that everybody kind of knows him from. He really shows more of himself here. I saw some people saying that they thought he was laying it on too thick, because at the very beginning of the movie and a good chunk of the movie when we first meet him, he's kind of a wimp. He's kind of like, you kind of just look at him like, dude, just shut up. Stop it. But, there are alien, monster things running around trying to kill you for making the slightest bit of sound. Plus, his character is revealed. He's in America to study law school. His parents are in England. So he's far away from home. He doesn't know anybody. And the first person he runs into just happens to be Sam, who wants nothing to do with him. So yeah, that's kind of cool. But of course, for many, the MVP will be the cat, will be Frodo, who's played by two different cats in this movie. Which honestly, the only big thing that you have to suspend your disbelief for is that this cat is the most well-behaved, quietest cat in the world. In the history of all cats, he is the most well-behaved and quiet that you can ever imagine. And this is the only spoiler that I will give you. You guys know I'm not, I will talk about spoilers and I will tell you about spoilers. But this, I think everyone is okay with this spoiler. The cat does survive. You don't have to worry about that. If you're like, oh no, I don't want to see the movie because I don't want to see no, he survives. So go watch the movie in peace if you're okay with that. The rest of the movie, since we're at it, is pretty good. It is very good. These movies thrive on their sound design and it works to full effect here, which of course works even more in favor to the tense scenes, of Sam and Eric trying to avoid the aliens or them separately trying to avoid it, because they both have very great sequences of, trying to get past the aliens by themselves and separated from each other. Actually, that was very great. The multiple alien attacks in this movie are very good. The way they're shot are very good. There's that scene in the fog that we briefly see in the trailer. It's extended a lot. It's a lot more longer than I thought it would be in the movie. And I kind of almost would have liked to have a little bit more of it, to have that scene play out a little longer. But, there's only so much you can do with that scene. But there are multiple alien attacks in here. There's even a jump scare that we all know is a jump scare, but it happens and it still works. And my theater, after it happened, everyone let out that nervous laugh where a jump scare gets you, right? Everyone knows that jump scare. Everyone knows that laugh. Everyone knows like, oh, you got me. Everyone in my theater burst out laughing when that scene happened because we got. So all in all, A Quiet Place of Day One is really good. It is a worthy prequel, sequel, whatever you want to call it, addition to the A Quiet Place universe. I think the question, people will have is like, does this add anything to the movies that we didn't already know? Yes and no. You have Jungwon Hansu in this movie, who of course was in the second movie, so you kind of see him a little bit in here. So you kind of know where he came from. He came from New York. He was in New York with his family and everything that happens with him. So there's no real tense. So like, oh, is he gonna make it? Because he makes it because he's in part 2. Do they add anything new? Kind of. There is a scene in here where you're kind of wondering, what the hell are they doing? The aliens. They kind of, there is something there, and it's not really like, they linger on it a little bit, and you're like, what are they doing? But you you don't know what they're doing. So there's, that's the good thing about these movies. Like, there's no like, oh, hey, like this is, like the scientist, the guy in the lab coat, right? That's what they call him, the guy in the lab coat that tells you everything that's going on. We don't have that. We can't have that, really, because, these aliens will kill you the second they get. But we do see something, and you're kind of just wondering, and it leaves you more questions, like, what are they doing? So I don't know if they'll focus on that in the next movie or not, but that's kind of what it is. And you do kind of get like this new one, because there is one particular alien that's very much different from the others, and I kind of want to see more of that. So this movie does, I don't know if it adds anything, like really, really adds anything, other than what are they doing right there, right? Like that's the thing you're kind of wondering about. Okay, that's all I got for you. That's all I got for this, for A Quiet Place part. Highly recommend it even if you're not a fan of the movies, or if you are a fan of the movies, I highly recommend it. If you're not a fan of the movies, I kind of would still recommend it because it's a very good movie for horror fans. I wouldn't say it's the best horror movie. I would say it's one of my favorite horror movies so far this year. But we'll talk about that in October. All right, that's all I got for June for you guys. Quiet Place Part 1 and Inside Out 2, the Bikeriders, and trigger warning in this video. Again, I already talked about Bad Boys for Life, or Bad Boys Ride or Die, sorry, The Watchers, and Under Paris in another episode. We'll move on to July. We're in July. Hopefully everyone had a good Independence Day weekend. July is filled with some great movies. I'm going to be doing a lot more single episodes in July, hopefully. So there probably won't be a roundup for July. I don't want to make any promises on that, but if there is, it's going to be very short, probably like this one. And yeah, so July, probably Deadpool Wolverine will get a solo review. Twisters will probably get a solo review. Maybe Long Legs as well, because everyone's talking about Long Legs, and maybe that will be its own thing. Who knows? We'll see. But thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast. Very much appreciated. You guys are awesome. You guys are great. Let me know what your June looked like. What was your favorite movies in June now that both episodes are up? Doesn't even have to be, one that we talked about. And I will see you guys on the next one. Be good people, be safe, and as always, go watch some movies.
Whoop whoop! Yeah! Give it up! Movies!